so start when I'm ready.
Yep.
Okay. So my name is James Cordova, and the proposition that I'm bringing you here today is that the United States' presence in the world is weakening. The United States, being the world's largest economy and being the biggest, one of the biggest players in the world, it is really. Can I start over?
Sure.
I'm so sorry. Okay, so the United States, my proposition is that the United States' presence in the world is weakening. And there's three ways that I'm going to mention that we can measure this by. The first is that U.S. dedication to our defense and our defense budget is decreasing. Our second is that the United States is reluctant to fight our enemies on the battlefield. And the third way to measure this is that enemies of the United States are actually gaining power. My first point is that the United States is losing its dedication to defense. According to the Council on Foreign Relations, the United States military took an 8% fall in defense spending in 2013, while the global the global military spending in the world went up 2%. Now, this is at a time when the United States had just left Iraq and ISIS was on the rise. So you may be wondering, why are we doing this? A lot of this could be the current administration and the unwillingness to fight, but we'll get to that in a minute. The Council on Foreign Relations also said that the budget, Obama's defense budget, wants to decrease spending to 2.3% of the GDP by 2024, which is the lowest since World War II in the post-World War II era. Now, at a time when the United States is facing many enemies throughout the world, it makes you wonder, why are we not beefing up our defense? Why are we not taking these threats seriously? And it is because we are reluctant to fight our enemies, and that is my second point. And some proof of this would be the conflict in Syria. According to a CNN article, President Obama has said himself that he will not provide ground troops in Syria, which is a huge battleground right now between ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and where many civilians are being killed by terrorist fighting groups, and Russia, who has bombed major medical aid convoys and civilian inhabitants. And this is a big problem. The question is, why are we not providing aid? Why are we not fighting? Why is the United States reluctant to fight? It's because of weak leadership. It is because we are not seeing the leadership that we should be. You heard it from the president himself. He does not want to fight in Syria. Another way to measure this is the way the United States left Iraq. This is another way to measure that the United States does not indeed want to fight its enemies on the battlefield. And according to General Raymond T. Odierno, he says that, end quote, "If we had stayed a little more engaged in the war in Iraq, I think maybe the rise of ISIS, might have been prevented. I've always believed the United States played a role of honest broker between all the groups, and when we pulled ourselves out, we lost that role." This is a very major indicator from an expert general that the United States should have had that will to fight in Iraq and should have left when the region was more stable. Now, with all this to keep in mind, not only is this reluctance to fight hurting us, it's also it is in turn making our enemies stronger. And here are a couple of examples that I can use that I'll tell you to support my claim. A CNN article has stated that North Korea in September launched a successful nuclear warhead test. Now, this lack of U.S. presence in the world has led to our enemies like North Korea launching a successful nuclear weapons test, a nation that has been clearly shown to be unstable and our enemy, and yet we have let this nation develop nuclear weapons. Another example of this is again in the battleground in Syria, where terror group Al-Qaeda is becoming more powerful by attracting rebels in the nation, rebels against the government, to align with Al-Qaeda's satellite group there. This could be a direct result of the absence of the United States in Syria, because without the United States influence in the rebel groups, they are turning to Al-Qaeda and other terror groups to help fight the government there. Now, in review, my proposition is that the United States presence in the world is weakening. I have given examples, or my claims are that the United States dedication of defense is decreasing. We've seen this through budget cuts in the military and future budget cuts in the military that are being planned by our leaders. My second claim is that the United States is reluctant to fight our enemies, which is shown by the points I've given, and the enemies of the United States seem to be getting stronger, which I also showed with the two examples of Al-Qaeda and North Korea. Thank you. What?
All right, the proposition's very clearly identified. There's a good setup of what the secondary structure is going to be. The signposting on that structure is okay in the body of the speech. Sometimes I do think that you could be a little bit clearer. You used, for example, your reasoning on the first point as the transition to the second point, and I don't know that that exactly is convincing. You've got examples that you present. You've got some statistical data on the first point, which I thought was pretty effective. The proof on weak leadership is not as convincing as it ought to be. You need a little bit more demonstration about, for instance, how the administration has failed to live up to its own red lines or criteria, that the policy of the United States is disengagement, or to allow local groups or international groups to address these kinds of issues instead of going it alone, something along those lines, or taking the lead on those particular issues. The best argument that you have there, of course, is Syria, where you need to kind of outline how the U.S. has stepped back in participating in that process. The fact that they're not sending ground troops doesn't necessarily indicate that they aren't willing to take a leadership position. I think there are other arguments that you could make that suggest that we were unwilling to take a leadership position. You kind of assume that ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and Russia and their activities show that we are disengaged. I don't know how accurate that is. What U.S. actions are currently, how much more effective their actions would be if we accelerated or increased actions. There's not enough discussion of that, I think, to make the point that you've got. On the argument that the enemies are getting stronger or gaining ground, I think you've got a good example with North Korea, although, I'm not exactly sure what U.S. actions could have been taken or what leadership position could have been taken that would have altered that. I think there are some legitimate problems that are faced whenever you're talking about the sovereignty of a country that, basically is run the way North Korea is. The oppressiveness of that country is really problematic. Syria, I think, is a better illustration, but again, I think you needed a few more details on what's going on in Syria and how that's going to matter in the long run. I think there's a larger context that also got missed, that the United States kind of pulled back on a lot of things in the Middle East as a result of the supposed Arab Spring, that they're going to fix all their own problems and we're going to stand by and watch it all flower, and this idea that that didn't work out so well. And you're making the argument that says we neglected to intervene and help and guide and provide support, and I think that that's a good argument, but it needs a lot more proof than you've provided. All right, thank you.